Hi everyone. I before I get into this one, I just want to start off with a subject that is probably worthy of a video of its own, but I'll just say it in passing for now, just because there's other things I want to talk about, and it may be a one-off look as opposed to something that's very regular, but I think it's worth a little bit of commentary. I had that message that some of you may have come across before. This comment violates our community guidelines. That was on MSN News. If you have Microsoft, then MSN News comes up and you can comment on various reports. One of my comments was removed, no explanation given. I think it had been a response to someone. It was regarding what I mentioned previously about the North London Council winning itself with Palestinian settlement. And the strange thing is, my other comments were allowed, and they weren't any more taboo or opinionated than that one. So it makes me really wonder about this because it's happened before. I'm not reckless. I'm not the sort of person to, even if I feel strongly about something, I'm not going to go out and make a crass insult or it goes without saying I never make threats or any racist or sexist statements. So I really wonder how they monitor these things. I wonder is there certain keywords that they have some sort of algorithm where they just censor people. Frankly, it pisses me off because I don't think it's consistent and I gave them a bit of feedback to that extent. I mean, there were some comments on that report that were very anti-Palestinian and quite dehumanizing language, actually. They were allowed to stay. So I think that when it comes to censorship online, I'm not of the opinion that there should be an absolute free for all that absolutely anything should fly. I think where there are absolutely clear threats, for example, or where the abuse just gets vitriolic, then there has to be some sort of reining in of that. But broadly speaking, I take the view on this as I do with free speech more broadly. People should more or less be allowed to say what they want as long as it isn't, like I say, in a um, threatening context, or that it just becomes so vitriolic that it just kind of becomes a gutter. But I do think people should be allowed to strongly disagree, to challenge others, to criticize others. And so I don't want to make a bigger thing of this than it is. It may just be a fluke, it may be some algorithm, but that's concerning because it's inconsistent. It's inconsistent. So I told them as much in the feedback. I had no recourse to actually challenge their ruling on that particular comment, but I did give them feedback and said I'm not happy about the lack of consistency. So I'm starting off with that. I wonder have any has anyone watching this experienced something similar? It is frustrating, no explanation given, um, and there's no logic to it because other comments that I've made that are similar are past, so it doesn't make any sense. Now, that having been said, I want to talk about the Eurovision. Okay. It was held last night in Basel in Switzerland. I'll be honest, I always thought that city had a silent S. I always thought it was pronounced Bal, but apparently not. It's Basel. Anyway, yeah, I watch it with my parents, even though we all think it's a bit naff. I think most British viewers of the Eurovision tend to see it that way. The UK always gets automatic entry because we're one of the big four that fund it, along with Spain, Germany, and France. Um, and I understand cynicism around the Eurovision. I think, especially in recent years, the overall quality of entries has been absolutely dire. I really don't think there's much musical talent there. Now, of course, this is absolutely subjective. Others might disagree, but I think the number of songs that you could pick out and say, actually, that person has a good voice and that's a genuinely memorable beat, tune, melody, I think is minimal. I think most of it's forgettable. I do think that kind of camp kitsch is definitely a big thing in Eurovision. The more LGBT friendly it is, I think that sells. And I'm not saying, oh, that's a terrible thing. I'm just making an observation that does seem to sell in Eurovision. Um, But last night, inevitably, there was controversy with the Israeli entry. Now, this for me is something that warrants a little bit of discussion because there's a lot of ways to look at it. Um, Firstly, with Eurovision, there's a discrepancy between the so-called jury vote and the so-called public vote. And mechanisms of it are a little bit complex. I'm still not entirely sure, for instance, how the jury works, if that's like professional musicians. I'm not quite sure how they're selected or what. In that part, the UK was doing quite well. Our group was a trio, three girls. Remember Mondays? They were okay. I wouldn't say they were anything special. They were okay. Kind of catchy. I thought the choreography was a bit all over the place. You know, they kind of it was a little bit catchy. Then they went for a totally different. I thought it was a bit disjointed, honestly. But regardless, we were doing quite well. We were on the healthy side of the bar, put it that way. But then when it came to the public votes, that totally changed. Poland was relatively low and it shot up into the upper quartile. Um, and two countries got 0 points. The UK, that's certainly not something that we are immune from, and Switzerland. Now, I thought that was an example of why Eurovision can be nonsense because the Swiss singer, I thought she had a genuinely good voice. Was it a memorable song? Not particularly. Was it great? No. But she had a good voice. The same with the Dutch entry. He was singing in French. He had a good voice. He got lackluster marks. So I honestly wonder about this public vote. I wonder, is it a genuine reflection of public opinion? Israel shot up into second position, and in the end, it became very, very close. Austria won. I think Austria was one of the worst entries, to be quite honest. Um, but frankly, I'm pleased that Israel didn't win, and this is why. I think she was actually a better singer than the Austrian entry. Again, nothing particularly remarkable about her piece. I don't think it was particularly memorable. I think she had a decent voice. I think it was a decent performance, but I don't think it was exceptional. But why am I pleased Israel didn't win? Because had Israel won, I think the controversy would have been massive. I think it would have been a toxic debate would have followed. And I think, actually, I don't think Israel would have been able to host it in the current situation for obvious security reasons. I think a lot of competitors would have been reluctant to go to Tel Aviv next year if this war is still going on. Then we get into the moral questions. Now, my understanding is that Israeli participant, Adam Raphael, I believe is her name, she was personally a hostage or related to a hostage. I don't know the full story there. So she has a sentimental, emotional backstory to that. I understand there were some protesters tried to rush her on the stage. I don't think that's particularly, I wouldn't justify that. Booze, though, I think that there is a real moral argument Israel shouldn't have taken part. You know, if Russia is banned from the Eurovision, what it's doing in Ukraine, I think there's a moral argument that Israel shouldn't be allowed to enter for the daily atrocities it's carrying out in Gaza. I mean, there is a bit of double standards there. Now, she said that she wasn't allowed to wear the hostage pin. That's it seems strange to me if Israel's going to take place anyway. It seems like a bit of a trivial thing to not let her wear a hostage pin, particularly when people and they said it was a political gesture. I don't think solidarity with hostages is a political gesture. However, Israeli participation, I don't think you can take politics out of the Eurovision now. Most people see it for what it is. It's a big kitsch song contest. There's tactical voting, people vote for the neighbours, etc. I've always seen it as a bit of escapism. I've never taken it very seriously. But like I say, there is double standards in Russia not being allowed to enter, yet Israel can. But you know, what's to say that the Russian entries don't support Putin any more, more than how? I mean, I don't know what the politics of this young woman is. I don't know if she's pro or anti Netanyahu. It's not her fault that she was a hostage. That's an awful experience for anyone to go through. Um, but this thing about it's the same in sporting events. There is two arguments here. One argument is it's just about music. Politics shouldn't have any role, and don't judge people by their nationality. And I'm kind of inclined to agree with that. I don't believe in punishing people for their nationality. But there is another argument which is, I think, also valid. If countries are given international platforms, such as a major music competition, no matter how kitsch it is, Eurovision is a big event, or the Olympics, um, that is an international platform. And for a country to get that platform, to be treated as equal, to be treated in a normal way, does kind of serve to whitewash what that country is doing. Um, and here's the thing, it's a bit ridiculous to say it's not political when the Israeli government is making it political by actively encouraging people to vote for her. That's why I'm a little bit skeptical of the public vote. There are millions and millions of Europeans who are very skeptical of what Israel's doing in Gaza, yet she still got high results. Now, that was that purely because of talent? Maybe, but I'm more inclined to believe that was part of the concerted effort by the Israeli government. And I have to be honest, the Ukrainian government does it as well, and it tries to get people to vote for Ukraine. I don't even agree with that. I'm strongly supportive of Ukraine on the battlefield, but I'm not going to vote for Ukraine just because it's Ukraine. I don't think their act was wonderful. Um, I'm strongly supportive of Ukraine when it comes to the battlefield, when it comes to standing against Russia's war crimes. But I'm not going to say, for example, Ukraine should win just because they're in that situation. I do think that talent should win it. Last night, I don't believe the Austrian act was the best. Um, and I don't know if Israel was good enough to be at the second spot, but regardless, um, I am skeptical that this was a genuine public vote. I think what happened was the Israeli government, that's what happened. There was a concerted effort to get people to vote for Israel, and I suppose in that sense it technically was a public vote. But is it a genuine reflection of popularity, or is it a reflection of a propaganda effort to just help out the Israeli contestant rather than focusing it based purely on musical talent? I think it's more likely to be what I said, about the Israeli government pushing that. I mean, they were going out of the way, vote for contestant number, victories of fourth position. Um, but more broadly, I also think, I have to say this, I do think Europe has jitters about the charge of anti Semitism for obvious reasons, because Europe, more than any other continent, has a very dark history of anti Semitism, culminating in the Holocaust. Okay, so I think if the European Broadcasting Corporation, I think it's called, were to ban Israel, absolutely Netanyahu's regime would cynically use the anti Semitism label. Um, Absolutely, they would do that, and that some others might lap it up. So I do think there's European jitters about getting that charge, and I think it's one of the biggest insults to Holocaust victims to weaponize anti-Semitism to silence criticism of Israel. I think that's disgraceful, and I think unquestionably anti-Semitism is used as a way to silence criticism of Israel. Um, I think that, when people were booing the Israeli entry, for her, obviously, it would be hard not to take it personally, and it would be daunting to go into an arena where people are cheering you. But I see the booing not so much about her personally, but about a reflection that people are angry about what Israel is doing every single day. In the 24 hours around, let's say, the Eurovision final, scores more Palestinian civilians have been killed by Israeli airstrikes. Now, that's just the reality. Doctors have described Gaza as a human slaughterhouse. This is what's happening. So, is it valid for Israel to be normalized, to be said, "Oh, it's just another country, and this is their entry, and let's treat it normally"? I suppose if you want to get purist, you can argue a lot of countries are doing things that are morally questionable, but not to that extent. I mean, let's look at some of the other countries: Austria, um, Greece, Belgium, what have you. Certainly, the smaller countries are not bombing their neighbours and killing hundreds, thousands of civilians. I do think that what Israel is doing right now is an abomination. I think it's definitely on par. with what Russia's doing in Ukraine. Now, people point out the difference is, Israel isn't, there's human shields. It's not a situation whereby Israel's invaded Gaza. But the point is, right now, we're looking at a situation where the Israelis are going beyond self defense. It is looking like an outright, at least ethnic cleansing. I think, I actually believe if all hostages were released tomorrow, Israel would still find a reason to bomb Gaza. Okay, they have the Iron Dome. Top Hamas commanders have been taken out. Many hostages have been released, yet the bombing continues. I believe if every hostage was released, I don't see Netanyahu's cabinet, his far right cabinet, just leaving it at that. I think they want to completely eradicate the Gaza Strip. And there's another point, we hear a lot about the hostages in Gaza. And it is awful. I do have enormous sympathy with what those people are going through. I do think they've been degraded. I do think it's awful conditions they're in. But there are minors, Palestinian minors in Israeli jails. There's been scant due process for the hundreds of Palestinians held in Israeli jails. Why shouldn't they be deemed to be hostages as well? There is an argument perhaps that they should be. I mean, is there really a major moral difference? Um, I certainly think that what Israel's doing, I think if you have your entire family wiped out, it's no good saying, oh, well, Israel wasn't deliberately targeting you. It's just, I think that's a vapid point. I think it's almost in bad taste. Given the extent of what we are seeing, it's just, I've got to the point I see no moral difference between what Hamas done to the people in the kibbutz settlement and what Israel's now doing. I really don't see any moral difference. A civilian is a civilian is a civilian. Whatever propaganda either Hamas or Netanyahu's cabinet uses, that is what they're both doing. Um, I mean, put it this way, regarding Israel participating in the Eurovision, it's a point worth mentioning as well. Israel's not a European country. Let's say there was a Palestinian delegation. Well, there might well be Jewish groups who protest against that, because they would say that's normalizing Hamas. So I really don't think that it's invalid to argue that Israel shouldn't participate. I think if you have an Israeli singer and they're talented, I think there should be an option for them to participate under a neutral flag, something like that. And actually, it could be argued, even if this young woman isn't particularly pro Netanyahu, the fact that she is proudly representing Israel at a time when Israel is bombing its, Gazan civilians, if she's not condemning that, then frankly, she is complicit. There is an argument to be made to that extent as well. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. My overall thinking is I've long resisted the idea that people should be penalised because of their nationality, and I've long been in favour of the notion that sports, music, etc. unite people. But I do think when a country is doing what Israel is doing, what Russia is doing, I would include a few others, what China is doing to the Uyghurs, what Burma is doing there, I don't think that normalizing that country is necessarily justified. Of course, the dilemma is if you ban one country, then it gets into a moral argument about, well, should the UK be allowed to take part because we arm Saudi Arabia and we arm Israel, and then it gets into that realm. So I do understand why it could be a bit of a moral maze, but I, uh, I do find it sad that a lot of people are apathetic or even supportive of what Israel is doing right now. I think it is an absolute abomination, and I can't say that enough. And yeah, I've absolutely altered my stance. I went from being strongly pro-Israel to being pretty critical of Israel. I'm not neutral on this anymore. Um, before October the 7th, it wasn't the case that I was always pro-Israel. There was previous times when I was deeply uneasy about the bombing of Gaza, about the civilian death toll, but I'd always kind of played the devil's advocate. I'd always sort of said, well, Israel's got no choice, it has to defend itself, Hamas uses human shields. That's all true, but nothing justifies what Israel's doing right now. I mean, all the other conflicts in my lifetime, you add them all together, it doesn't come close to the sort of casualties we're seeing right now. This is an exceptionally bad situation, even by the standards of Gaza, which has to be one of the most bleak places on earth. And if people doubt that there's denialism going on, I've heard people argue that Gaza isn't even a war zone. I've seen people argue with a straight face that there's no humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Shame on them. And I'm not just talking about Israelis, I'm talking about Britons who actually say with a straight face there's no humanitarian crisis in Gaza. It's all Hollywood, it's all made up. But discount Hamas sources, consider the Red Cross, consider the Lancet, consider all these independent sources that I think know what they're talking about. That's my thoughts regarding whether or not Israel should take part. I am sympathetic to the argument that it shouldn't, but I do understand both points of view. Let me know your thoughts.